Today we're diving into a really fascinating ancient Sanskrit parable from a text called the Padma Purana. It's this incredible story about a man's desperate wish, a pretty clever deception, and the completely unforeseen consequences that spiral out from there. But this isn't just any old tale. It kicks off with a massive question, one that really gets to the heart of the whole thing. Can a story, just the act of hearing it, actually have the power to save a person's soul? The source text makes this absolutely extraordinary claim. It says that just listening to this one particular story is the most powerful act of purification there is. I mean, more than rituals, more than charity, just listening can supposedly wash away even the deepest sins. So if a story is that powerful, you have to ask, who is it for? And that brings us to our first section. The text is actually very specific about who can be saved by hearing this story, and let me tell you, the list is pretty long. Okay, so what's wild about this list is the sheer scope. We are not talking about small mistakes here. The text claims that a 7-day recitation of the story can purify pretty much anyone. The eternally sinful, the violent, people who are treacherous to their own parents, hypocrites, thieves. I mean, it's basically a catch-all for anyone who has sinned in thought, word, or deed. It's a really bold promise of total, absolute redemption. All right, with that in mind, let's actually meet the hero of our story. He's a really good guy, a righteous man named Ātmādeva, and his life is just about perfect, except for this one single sorrow that completely consumes him. So, Ātmādeva is the very picture of success. He's a brilliant scholar, a master of sacred texts, he's rich, everybody respects him, he literally has everything a person in his time could possibly dream of. But the one thing he doesn't have, a child, makes all of that feel completely worthless. And then you have his wife, Dhundhakārī. The text paints her as basically his polar opposite. She's stubborn, kind of cruel, and she loves to argue. This clash of personalities, it's going to become super important to the story in just a minute. Ātmādeva gets so overwhelmed with grief that he just up and leaves his home and wanders into the forest. He finds a sage by a lake and just pours his heart out. And you can really feel his pain in this quote. He feels like his whole life is cursed, that his very presence makes things barren and empty, without an heir to share it all with. So the sage, who can see how destiny works, takes a look at Ātmādeva's fate, and the news is just devastating. He tells him point blank, look, for the next 7 lifetimes, you are destined to be childless. That's it. The verdict seems final, sealed by fate.
But Ātmādeva just will not accept this. And his desperation leads us to the story's big turning point, a moment that involves a bit of magic and a really crafty lie. Let's see how this all plays out. Ātmādeva gets so upset, he actually threatens to end his own life right then and there. And this raw, desperate act, it moves the sage to kind of bend the rules of destiny a little bit. He offers a loophole, a magical workaround that comes in the form of a single enchanted piece of fruit. But of course, there's a catch. This gift comes with some very strict rules. His wife has to eat the fruit, and then for 1 whole year, she has to live a life of perfect purity, truth, and charity. If she does all that, the sage promises she'll have a divine, virtuous son. The stage is set for a miracle. Or so it seems. But when Ātmādeva gets home and gives the fruit to Dhundhakārī, she refuses to eat it. And this is so telling of her character. She's not thinking about fate or a divine son. She's thinking about the real world stuff, the pain of childbirth, her body changing, being too weak to do anything, losing her freedom. From where she's standing, being childless is actually happier. So she comes up with a plan. She lies right to Ātmādeva's face, tells him she ate the fruit, but in secret, she takes that magical piece of fruit and gives it to their cow. And that one single lie changes the course of everything. So now, because of this deception and the misplaced magic of the fruit, we get the birth of 2 very, very different sons. And each one really embodies how they came into the world. To make her lie believable, Dhundhakārī's sister, who just had a baby, agrees to secretly sell her newborn to Dhundhakārī for some money. So Dhundhakārī fakes the whole birth, and her husband, Ātmādeva, is just overjoyed. He names the boy Dhundhakārī, completely clueless about the switch. But then, something truly strange happens. 3 months later, the cow
the one who actually ate the magic fruit, gives birth to a perfect child. It has a human body, but the ears of a cow, and it shines like gold. Ātmādeva is blown away and names this miraculous child Gokarna, which means cow ears. And as they grow up, the two boys couldn't be more different. I mean, this slide says it all. Gokarna, who came from the sacred gifts, becomes this wise, brilliant, gentle scholar. Dhundhakārī, who came from a lie, grows up to be a vicious, cruel thug who's just consumed by anger. You've got good and evil born and raised under the same roof. Dhundhakārī's evil is just off the charts. He steals, he sets fires, he tortures kids and animals, he blows his father's entire fortune on prostitutes. And then, the ultimate horror. He starts physically beating his own parents. He is the living embodiment of that sinner we heard about at the very beginning of the story. And this all brings us to the philosophical punchline of the story. Ātmādeva's greatest wish has twisted into his worst nightmare. Now he has to turn to his divine son, Gokarna, to figure out how to finally escape the sorrow. At this point, Ātmādeva is just completely broken. He cries out that being childless was so much better than this. The one thing he wanted more than anything in the world, once he got it through a lie, brought him more pain than he ever thought possible. He's totally trapped in his own misery. But it's his other son, the wise Gokarna, who shows him the way out. He lays out this 4-step path to peace. And it's all about letting go, realizing the body is just a temporary thing, releasing your attachment to family and money, and most importantly, finding real truth by immersing yourself in sacred stories. And you know what? It actually works. Ātmādeva takes his son's advice to heart. He leaves for the forest, dedicates himself to study and devotion, and he finally finds enlightenment. He escapes the very sorrow that his own desire created. So for him, it seems the answer to that first question is a definite yes. A story really can save a soul. But that leaves us with one final big question, doesn't it? The story paints the wicked son, Dhundhakārī, as the villain, the source of all the pain. But when you look at the whole picture, was he really the cause? Or was he just a symptom of a deeper problem? Where did this tragedy truly begin? With a man so desperate he had to defy his own fate? Or with a woman's fear that led her to tell one catastrophic lie? It's definitely something to think about.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're opening up a really profound ancient Sanskrit narrative.
Yeah.
It's likely from the Padma Purana.
And it makes this just radical theological claim.
It really does. It offers a kind of spiritual shortcut to erase pretty much any sin you could ever commit.
But, and this is the key, to prove that power, the text just plunges us right into this messy, agonizing, and shockingly familiar family drama.
That tension is everything, isn't it?
It is. You have these sources promising total liberation for everyone, no matter what they've done.
But the test case for it involves a scholar who's just consumed by obsession, a wife paralyzed by selfishness,
And a son born from all that deceit who is, well, frankly, he's monstrous.
So our sources focus on the Saptaha Yajna. That's a 7-day ritual of sacred storytelling.
And we're going to unpack the claim that this process is the supreme purifying agent for the age we live in, the Kali Yuga.
Right. Our goal here is to see how the story of this Brahma, Ātmādeva, serves as either the ultimate proof or maybe the ultimate failure of that spiritual promise.
Well, to set the stage, the text begins by drawing this divine portrait. It's the ultimate goal of devotion. It describes the divine presence itself.
That's Bhagavan Bhaktavatsala.
Exactly. Dark like a monsoon cloud. Ganeshama, wearing these yellow robes, Pitavaso. He's beautiful, has a forest garland Vanamali, and he's holding a flute.
Muralidhara.
Yeah.
But this isn't just, a pretty picture, is it?
Not at all. The text says this vision enters the pure hearts of the devotees the moment the narration begins. It makes the whole thing deeply personal right away.
It's immediately accessible.
And what's really fascinating here is that the power is tied specifically to the act of hearing. That's Tatkatashravantam.
The hearing itself is the transformative act.
It's so potent. The text claims that celestial beings, residents of Kuta, like Uttava, they secretly hide themselves just so they can listen in.
So the narrative itself is this huge magnet for divine grace.
An unparalleled magnet, yes.
Yeah.
And the effect on the human assembly is just overwhelming.
We hear about massive cheers, Jai Jai Ravo, and these showers of flower dust.
Krita yes, but the most striking result is the complete loss of self-awareness.
They forget their body, their home, even themselves.
They're just totally absorbed, and this state of absorption leads the sage Narada to make the core theological claim of the whole text.
He calls it alaukiko.
Unworldly, beyond ordinary experience. He's very explicit. In Kali Yuga, our age, nothing purifies the mind, satasya shuddhya, or destroys the massive sins. Nothing destroys it like this sacred narrative, this katha.
That is just an immense claim. I mean, the text is basically offering a universal, non-discriminatory shortcut to salvation.
Absolutely. And it doesn't shy away from extremes to prove its point.
It says that even dull, wicked people, mushieshe, and surprisingly, even animals and birds, pashupakins, become utterly sinless, bhupatama, just by being exposed to it.
It's a theological fast pass. You just skip the years of penance.
You do. And the Kumaras then detail this extensive list of people who are saved by this 7-day commitment. Right, the Saptahayanya. It includes people consumed by the fire of anger.
Tvrtagnidagda. And those who are just riddled with lust, the Kamina.
The list really covers everyone.
It ensures no one is left out. You have people who lack truth, people who slander their own parents, those full of greed, that kuleshka.
It gets very specific, doesn't it?
It does. It talks about those who commit the 5 great sins, cheats, people who are as cruel as pishachas, ghouls or fiends.
And it even mentions misusing the property of brahmajas, brahmashvapu.
And adultery, if you have Kartakaran. So the foundation is set. This narrative has absolute purifying power.
So now the text throws its biggest challenge at itself.
Can this spiritual power save a family that is just completely consumed by the most basic human failings? Obsession, ego, spite.
And that's where the story of Ātmādeva begins.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. We meet Ātmādeva. He's a brilliant Vedic scholar, wealthy, described as being like a second son. He sounds like the perfect devotee.
He does. The sources are careful to build him up, which just makes the tragedy that follows all the more acute.
And his wife is Dhundhārī.
Yes. Highborn, beautiful, but the text immediately pulls back the curtain. She's cruel, stubborn, talks way too much, and is quarrelsome.
She has some serious flaws.
Very human flaws.
So they have this amazing life, but it's all ruined by one absence. Putri.
No son, no daughter. And they try everything. Charity, giving away gold, land, cows, but nothing works.
It feels like such a modern struggle where all their success is just meaningless without this one thing.
It is, and Ātmādeva's despair is just total. He says he's empty from the suffering of childlessness. Prajikrina Shinusham.
He leaves home planning to commit suicide.
He sees himself as so cursed that even his cow and the tree he planted are barren. It's just complete desolation.
And at this lowest point, he meets an ascetic, a yati.
Right, and this yati can read his fate, the Bala Akarala, right from his forehead, and the news is just crushing.
He tells him he'll be without a son for 7 lifetimes.
Sapjarmavavi tava putrut naiva kanevaka.
Yeah.
That repetition, naivaka, really hammers it home. It is not and will not be.
Wow. 7 lifetimes. That's not just bad luck, that's deep karma.
It is. And the yati tries to counsel him, turn to the spiritual path, detachment. Renunciation is the true source of happiness.
But Ātmādeva just will not accept it. This is the moment I find so compelling. He demands a son by force. Putra dahi baladapi.
He's fighting his own destiny. He argues that the life of a householder with kids is juicy sarasa compared to the dry, sukha life of an ascetic.
He is actively rejecting the very detachment the text is about to praise.
Exactly. He's rejecting his fate, rejecting wisdom, all for an earthly attachment.
So the yati, faced with this stubbornness, he gives in.
He grudgingly gives him a single piece of fruit, phala mekha, a powerful spiritual boon.
But it comes with a condition, a really crucial one.
Yes, to prevent the son from just inheriting all this bad karma, the son has to be pure atinirmala.
So his wife, Dhundhārī, has to follow these strict rules for a year.
Practice truth, cleanliness, compassion, charity, and only eat 1 meal a day, kapakta. The yati introduces purification through effort, not just magic.
So Ātmādeva gives the fruit to Dhundhārī and leaves. And this is where the story shifts from the husband's obsession to the wife's. Just complete selfish rejection of the whole thing.
Her rejection is fascinating because it has nothing to do with theology. Her anxieties are all practical. She's worried about her stomach swelling, being too weak to do housework.
And she's terrified of the pain of childbirth, prasatau dukkha.
She doesn't doubt the fruit's power. She just doesn't want the inconvenience and the pain. It's a purely cynical calculation.
And her conclusion just says it all.
In my opinion, a barren or widowed woman is happy. Vandya vivithavanari sukhini khati mamatya.
She sees freedom from chores and childbirth as true happiness. So she lies to her husband.
And that selfishness immediately leads to active deceit. She makes a plan with her pregnant sister.
Her sister will give up her newborn, and Dhundhakārī will just fake the pregnancy.
Right. But before she fully commits, she decides to test the fruit's power. She feeds it to the family cow, Dhamvai.
And the consequences are immediate. And they're dramatic.
They are. The boon's power is real, but Dhundhakāri's intent just corrupts the whole process. She adopts her sister's son and names him Dhundhakārī. He's the child of deception.
But then, 3 months later,
The cow gives birth.
a boy.
A divinely beautiful boy, golden in color, Kanakaparabam. He's so stunning the neighbors call Vamanopi, godlike.
The divine power of the fruit worked, even through an animal, while human deceit just created chaos.
And they name the cow-born son Gokarna. So now the text has set up the perfect dichotomy.
You have Gokarna born of purity and the yadi's original intent, versus Dhundhakārī, the product of human lies and selfishness.
And as they grow up, the contrast is just stark. Gokarna is learned, wise Pentujani.
And Dhundhakārī is wicked, crude Mahakala. He literally embodies the fruit of lies.
I mean, the description of his vices is truly terrifying. It shows how far people can fall. He was unclean, addicted to anger, a thief.
Universally hated.
He even sets fire to houses Paravishma Pratipaka.
But the most heinous crime, the one the text lists, is genuinely shocking.
It is. He would take infants, Arbakan, and just throw them into a well.
Kupinya Padat. It's cruelty pushed to the absolute extreme. He beat his parents and squandered all their wealth on prostitutes.
The son that Ātmādeva wanted so desperately became the source of his total ruin.
And Ātmādeva is finally broken by this.
He realizes his demand was a horrible mistake. He laments that being barren, Vandyatva, was better than having this cruel son.
And he's back where he started, contemplating suicide again. But this time his whole life is destroyed.
This is when Gokarna, the son born of accidental purity, steps in.
He offers the wisdom of detachment, Vairagya. He tells his father the world is essenceless, asara, and sorrowful, Dhundhakārī.
He says it's ephemeral, Kanapaganya. Gokarna's advice is so critical because he's representing the yadi's original teaching.
He's bringing his father full circle.
He is. He says true happiness belongs to the detached ascetic, Viraktasya Munor, not the king or the wealthy. He's telling his father to let go of the obsession that caused all this.
So Gokarna guides him back to the spiritual path. He tells him to leave the house, serve Hari, and find salvation Makar.
And how does he tell him to do it?
By reading the 10th canto, Dashamaya Paitat. The focus on scripture, on narrative, is the key.
And Ātmādeva follows the advice. He renounces his life, and the text confirms he achieved liberation. Shukamapa.
He escaped the 7 lifetime curse, not through the son he demanded, but through detachment.
The irony is just profound. The story proves the power of the katha of spiritual instruction.
By showing that insisting on material desire, Ātmādeva's obsession, Dhundhakārī's selfishness, leads only to suffering.
Horrific suffering in the form of Dhundhakārī.
And the purification that finally saves Ātmādeva comes from Gokarna, the son whose birth was basically an accident, a byproduct of testing the boon.
Ultimately, the whole tale is this vivid, tragic illustration. It confirms that the purification method, the katha, works. It's what gave Ātmādeva his liberation.
But it's also a brutal reminder that no amount of spiritual grace can override the consequences of human selfishness when people actively reject the path.
It really makes you question predestination versus free will.
Right. The yadi specifically prophesied 7 lifetimes of barrenness. Ātmādeva tried to override that with his ego.
And yet he achieved liberation in this life because of the wisdom from Gokarna, the son of the boon.
Which brings us to a final question for you, the listener.
Given that 7 lifetime prophecy, did Ātmādeva's liberation happen despite his karma? Or was the encounter with the yadi and the advice to study the scripture a different, higher kind of destiny that just overrode his initial fate?
What stands out more to you in this story? Obstinate human desire or spiritual grace delivered through narrative and instruction?